Welcome to the Braver Angels National Debate. My name is Cynthia O'Brien. I'll be your chair this evening. This is the place where you can have a better conversation on this topic than you might have anywhere else. That's our goal. Remember that Braver Angels debate is not like a high school debate where you're out to crush the opposition with data. It's not a candidates debate. It is a collective search for truth, and we're trying to share what we really do think. So, the number one thing, say what you believe. We can talk about hard things. Pretty much, we only talk about hard things here if we do it in the right spirit. And here it is. We have something called the Braver Angels Way. And I'll ask our director of debates, Jesse, to read it to us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Braver Angels Way. We state our views freely and fully, without fear. We treat people who disagree with us with honesty, dignity, and respect. We welcome opportunities to engage those with whom we disagree. We believe all of us have blind spots and none of us are not worth talking to. We seek to disagree accurately, avoiding exaggeration and stereotypes. We look for common ground where it exists and, if possible, find ways to work together. We believe that in disagreements, both sides share and learn. In Braver Angels, neither side is teaching the other or giving feedback on how to think or say things differently.
Thank you, Jesse. And thank you for your excellent work as our National Director of Braver Angels Debates. We appreciate you. Hands for Jesse. Okay. With that, I call this debate to order. The resolution is, if elected, Donald Trump will stand up to entrenched elites. To speak in favor of the resolution, the first speech is from Barbara Brown. Thank you for being willing to go first. Barbara, you have up to 4 minutes.
Thank you. This is a crucial question. Can Donald Trump, or indeed any national politician, stand up against the power and the money of our entrenched elites? A year ago, a lot of anti-elite, duopoly, third-party folks would have said, no way, not happening. However, we've seen a real change in the past couple of months. We now see that instead, his team is expanding and people aren't endorsing Donald Trump, they're joining the team. Robert Kennedy, Tulsi Gabbard, Elon Musk, these are major critics who are in not just endorsing him, right? They are on the team. They're working on transition plans for him. This is a big change from what normally goes on, where we just call up some Hollywood celebrity to make us look good and convince people that there's something important that we're doing. Trump himself is an outsider. When the RNC sort of capitulated to his candidacy, I think a lot of us thought, well, you know, he's a rich, powerful guy. How is he any different than anybody else? But in all honesty, he's not one of the Washington guys. So he's really not quite from there. And recently, I think we've seen this big time where a lot of the old powers that be in the Republican Party, complete with the Cheneys, have jumped ship. And my take on that is they're jumping ship because they do think that his new team and the coalition he's put together will be able to stand up against them. And what changes do they want? They've come up with not the ideological stuff that they'd like us to fight about, but they've asked us to look at some real fundamentals, problems with Americans' health. Hopefully, we've all heard that American lifespans are actually decreasing. Obesity, diabetes, childhood diseases are expanding in a rate that is almost unbelievable. Nobody, politicians haven't been talking about this. The economy, the deficit is continuing to be a major problem. Again, we don't hear people doing anything except complaining that it's the fault of the other party. But now we see that with his team, we're starting to hear people specifically talking about the economy. They're admitting that life has become unaffordable for the mass majority of Americans. We hear them now talking about the endless wars as an issue. And I think having put together a team of really dedicated change agents that have joined Trump, that I'm hoping that they'll be able to help him keep on track to do what he appears to want to do now, which is to make a major break with the entrenched powers that be.
About
And
30
I think we
seconds.
all can hope so, that this will actually happen. And it's hard. It's hard to trust that it can happen. And I'd be the first one to say there is a lot of money, a lot of power lined up against him. And having worked with the Kennedy campaign a little bit, it appears that they will go to no ends to prevent change.
And that's our
But
time. Barbara, wrap up, please.
thank you. So I think we just have to hope and work on making those change occurs regardless of what side we're on.
Thank you. Hands for our speaker, and I will invite one or two questions. The way that you step up to ask a question is you raise your Zoom hand. So use the Zoom hand function to raise your hand and ask a question. Uh, ask it to me about what the speaker said. Louise, you can unmute and ask your question to me.
Hi, Madam Chair. I just wonder why is it that that a new elite is likely to be better than the old elite? The old elite has some sense of self policing, but the new elite or the new power brokers might not have that kind of restraint. And I don't think we can really argue that
Okay,
Trump.
it's just a question. Just a
Okay, yeah.
question. All right. So, Louise, you want to respond?
Um, you mean
Louise,
Barbara?
I'm sorry, Barbara. Barbara, if you can unmute, and you've got about a minute to respond.
That's a really good question. And I'll have to say, I sometimes ask that same question. But I guess my take on it is that Main Street America as individuals is not powerful enough to go up against entrenched power. And we're going to have to be continually monitoring folks who pretend that they want change to make sure that they're not self-serving. It's not an easy road to go down when we're trying to make real change against powerful, wealthy people who clearly are benefiting from the system as it is. It's
I'll
not
take
going to be
one more.
easy.
Thank you. I'll take one more question from Nick. Nick, you can unmute and ask your question to the chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I would like to ask the speaker if we agree with the premise that the entrenched elites need to be challenged, can she explain why Donald Trump is the man to challenge them? What makes him the right person to take on that role?
Thank you, Barbara.
I think as an individual, he's probably not, but he has been able to assemble a rather unique, I think, group of change agents. If you haven't seen the Rescue the Republic videos, you probably should listen to some of the folks who have lined up behind him. Not all of them are elites. A lot of them are, I would call upper middle class. But they're all people who say change is necessary. And to be honest, I think from what I hear from that group, a lot of them also think that the Democrats, and now that large parts of the Republican elites have gone over to Harris's side, that group has told us in no uncertain terms that they won't make change. And we now have another group lined up against them who is saying that they do want change. Whether they'll be able to carry it out, and I'll have to say we need to be watching them day in and day out to make sure that they're not as self-serving as we've seen happening with the
Okay,
current elites.
thank you. With that,
Thank you,
speaker
Madam
is
Chair.
thanked. All right. Hands for our speaker and our questioners. And I want to commend the group here for waiting until the speech was over to raise your hand for a question. If you raise your hand as soon as the speaker begins speaking, you may not be addressing your question to what they are about to say. So thank you for just holding off until I call for questions. Thank you. Now we'll move to a speech in the negative, and I have Marjorie on deck. Marjorie, you can unmute and you have 4 minutes.
Okay. So I was not clear what elite was referring to when I read this statement. And so I looked up the word elite, and this is the definition I found. A select group that is superior in terms of ability or qualities to the rest of a group of society. So being a part of a group of elites with this definition seems like it could be quite positive. And I think of people who've won awards for amazing achievements like Nobel Prizes and Pulitzers, things like that. But in the context of this statement, it's pretty clear that the word elite is said with judgment and resentment as a group that needs to be stood up to. And when it comes to Trump, I assume that entrenched elites means Democrats or anyone who opposes him. And I'd like to say that Democrats are no more elites than Republicans are. Both were elected by a fair democratic process that's worked more or less for over 200 years. Trump tends to blame other groups, liberals, immigrants, his opponents, for everything. He likes to cast himself as strong, but complains about other people all the time. To me, that is not a quality of a strong and admirable person. It's easy to see who he is and predict what he intends to do by listening to him. He complains about elites, yet is one and craves being more of one. He warns that the election will be rigged, and that means he's planning to rig it. He tells horror stories about rapist immigrants with no data to support the statement, while he is a convicted rapist. In terms of power in our country, I think of elites, the negative kind of elites, as the wealthy individuals and corporations who rule with money, influencing our elections, polluting our groundwater and air. Through speculating in real estate, they're squeezing ordinary people out of their homes. They raise prices for essentials like food and utilities when there's a crunch, like during the pandemic, and then don't lower them again when the crisis is over. Trump aligns himself with these elites. He is not standing up to them. They are the people he admires and associates with. How can he call liberals elites when he campaigns with the richest person in the world? Donald Trump is an elite and always has been. The greatest concern I have about Donald Trump is how he wants to be the supreme elite. I take him seriously when he says he'll be dictator on day one. I I don't believe he is interested in providing what ordinary people like us want or need.
Okay, time to wrap up.
Okay. Um, I've heard, and I am not making this up, that he has said that he wants to get the military out against his opponents and build concentration camps for people who disagree with him.
And
And so I would,
that is our
okay,
time.
thank you.
Thank you. Hands for our speaker. And I'll take one or two questions for this speaker. Jonathan Jenkins, I see your hand. You can unmute and ask your question to the chair.
All right, can you see me?
I'm sorry, your connection is not great right now. We look forward to hearing from you maybe in a little bit. Sherry, you can unmute and ask your question to the chair.
Is it better now?
Yes, go ahead, Jonathan.
Okay. I was thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, go ahead.
I would ask of the previous. They said that Donald Trump said he'd use the military and put people in concentration camps. I would ask of where the previous speaker got that source.
Okay, thanks. Marjorie, just take a moment to answer.
I can't quote that exactly, but it's definitely, I have heard it.
Okay.
It came from his mouth. I can't remember exactly where, but it did.
Okay. Sherry, thanks for your patience. Go ahead.
No, I'm wondering, Madam Speaker, if you could ask her if she thinks the word elite in this context could mean something different than Democrats. Some people think of it as a deeper, unelected administration, and if she understands that that might exist, and if that concerns her at all. In other words, people that aren't elected but are part of the. Some people use the word deep state. Some people use the word unelected.
Okay, Marjorie, do you have a thought about it?
Um, the word deep state is very vague. I believe, as I said, I believe that the powers that are behind the scenes are mostly economic powers, economic and political powers. So if you want to call them deep state, sure, whatever. I don't think it's like a Wizard of Oz thing with someone behind the curtain. Exactly. So.
All right. And with that, our speaker is thanked. Our next speech is in the affirmative from Paul Norris. Paul, you can unmute and you have up to 4 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So what we actually face, and I don't actually see it as completely bad, but what we have is rule by experts through powerful institutions. That is really what is going on in America today. And I believe that is the true value proposition of the Democrats. You know, the belief that we need experts to be running things because they're the only ones who have the knowledge. And we have to have powerful institutions because we have big problems. And there's certainly a case to be made for that. But has anybody heard that argument from anybody besides me? This is not democracy. And we're not being presented with the true value proposition, which is, again, the powerful institutions and rule by experts. And this works for some people, but it doesn't work for everybody. It so happens, that, it worked for me. I'm going to use COVID as an example. COVID actually made my life easier. Why? Well, I'm highly educated and, I can do my work via Zoom. But this doesn't work for everybody, blue collar people, people without college degrees, and I know some people, whose lives were basically destroyed by the COVID response, experts operating through powerful institutions. And my youngest granddaughter has really lost out from that. It was time for her to go to school when COVID hit. And she, like just about everybody else in her cohort, is way, way, way behind where they would be otherwise. Donald Trump is a consummate insider who saw through the system and turned against it. And of course, they hate him. They hate him, they fear him, they despise him. And J.D. Vance, this is also somewhat true of J.D. Vance. Although J.D. Vance started poor, so he really knows what it's like to be an outsider, to not benefit from the system that we have. So, the COVID response, I think, is a great example of what we got through these rule of experts, through powerful institutions, with no recourse from those who are not insiders, and not really understanding how to take other people into account who aren't among the elites, the wealthy, those who have so much more control over their lives. Trump is the only candidate who could possibly address this issue. Is he the best candidate? I don't know, probably not. But he's the one we've got, and he's the only one we've got. And, I would just point out, why can we think that he would do this? Well, he has not spent his entire life in politics. He has experience in the private sector. He knows what governmental regulation looks like from the bottom at the tip of the spear. And his base understands this issue, those people who support him. He did deliver on his promise of giving us a Supreme Court that actually, at least sometimes, is trying to get us back to constitutional Republican government. But Trump has a real challenge from the top, and he came across this in his first term. How do you cut down the size of government when the only people who know how the whole thing operates are beneficiaries and buried in the machine? So this was part of the problem, that he came up against. And just, one last point I would make is, what does governmental overregulation do? I would say it stifles our economy in an unhealthy way. Most of the growth in the economy comes from new businesses, and big corporations are experts at using governmental regulation to discourage new competition. So that's what I have to say.
It's our time.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hands for our speaker. Having heard that speech, are there any questions? Atul, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. So I would like to ask the gentleman is that during COVID, the people were dying at every day very fast rate, and Trump was the president. So if you say that elite run during the COVID, whatever happened, everyone has their own choice of experience. But if he was the person, then how they think that COVID debacle or whatever he has is because of the elite in the government?
Okay, Paul, you want to respond?
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, so the COVID response was formulated. The CDC had a huge part in it. And the CDC is, ruled by experts. We had Francis Collins, who is actually somewhat repentant about, decisions that he made. I'm blocking on the name of the COVID guy, whose name we all know, but I can't remember it at the moment. But anyway, I mean, it's hard to come up with a better example
Fauci.
of decisions made by experts that affected everybody's lives and affected different people's lives very, very differently. And again, there was as far as I can tell, just a total lack of understanding of what happens to blue collar people, people who are not rich, who can't go to their home in Montana to get away from it all. There was no understanding, of what this would do to the population at large. It was screened out. And the people who did say anything, like the Great Barrington Declaration, they went after their careers, and basically tried to destroy their scientific standing. Hard to come up with a better example than COVID of what happens when elites get to make decisions without being challenged.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll take one more question for the speaker, Bob Fraley. Bob, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, so it seems that the president during the COVID was actually Donald Trump. And but I'm wondering, if the experts aren't the people who make the decisions, who's going to make the decision as to how we respond? How would you, in particular, how would you have responded differently that would have solved the problems that you saw?
How would they have responded differently? Okay, go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, well, so a couple things. Yes, of course, COVID started during Trump, but I give him a pass on that because, he didn't have the knowledge, or I don't think he had anybody to support him to understand the negative effects of the policies that were being put in place. If J.D. Vance had been there, I think he would have understood that intuitively and quickly. What should be done differently? It's interesting, in the movie Chernobyl, there's this wonderful scene where a woman who is a nuclear scientist is being overruled by a communist apparatchik because he did a great job of running a shoe factory. And, there's a conversation about that. No, I mean, I don't want us to pull like, a plumber off the street and, start making decisions about, what do we do about diseases. I don't want that. But the thing is, the system right now is so closed. It's so closed, and there's no recourse in many cases for, those who are not incredibly wealthy or don't have PhDs to make a point that, hey, look at how this affects me and people like me. Those voices are not in the room when experts are making their decisions. So that is the fundamental point. What should be done differently? More understanding of how other people are affected. And I do think if you really look around the world, you can see that the American COVID response was grossly overdone. The economy, it was not necessary to shut down the economy or the
Just to wrap up.
in the way that was done.
Yeah, thank you. With that, our speaker is thanked. Hands for our speaker. We're going to move to a speech in the negative, and I see Ben has stepped up. Ben, you can unmute and you have up to 4 minutes.
Great. Happy to be here, everybody. I'm an independent, policy-centered voter who believes that fierce negotiation of policies makes us a better country. I'm speaking against the Braver Angels resolution that Donald Trump will stand up against entrenched elites. And I'm doing so in an attempt to preserve negotiating in our policy making. While I'm drawn to the claim that Donald Trump will stand up against the entrenched elites, most of his speeches are very vague. I believe Marjorie already touched on this. What I hear is, I will save you from them statements. When driving into specifics, them can turn out to be immigrants, Democrats, bureaucratic elites, or China. Additionally, candidate Trump's actions wander from strongly worded tweets to threats of imprisonment. Look, vague campaign slogans like this seem to be crafted by candidates to pull us in because we, the voters, will fill in the gaps with what we want to hear. Thus, Madam Chair, I respectfully reject this resolution as being flawed because it treats these vapid campaign slogans as having objective substance. Instead, I will answer a slightly different question. When Donald Trump stands up against elites without negotiating, will his approach have a lasting positive impact? And I would argue that no, they will not. During his term in office, President Trump did stand up against one entrenched elite by removing or refusing to enforce the policies of President Obama. President Trump did this without negotiating with the bureaucratic elites that were in charge of putting these policies into place. As a result, the Brookings Institute points out that 22% of the Trump administration's regulatory or deregulatory actions that were challenged in court came through the legal process unscathed. That's an abysmal record. And then, of course, President Biden blocked or removed most of the remaining actions. Look, if President Trump continues to attack the elites without negotiating, he will continue to be ineffective. Almost in recognition of this ineffectiveness, President Trump's own staff has published something like Project 2025 with hundreds of pages of political actions. If candidate Trump adopts this plan, he will simply bypass those bureaucrats, as well as Democrats and many of our international agreements. Such a plan might deliver the policies that he wants to see put into place, but honestly, it doesn't stand up to anyone. Instead, what it does is it avoids conflict by changing the system to remove negotiation, both now and unfortunately in the future. If carried to an extreme, such policies will silence all effective dissidents. As a policy-based voter, I see only darkness if the negotiation in our policymaking is silenced like this. Looking to his record and to the proposed policies by his former staff, I see that when Donald Trump does stand up against the elites without negotiating, he will be ineffective or he will silence the opposition. A group like Better Angels should recognize the danger there. Please do not accept the resolution that Donald Trump standing up to the opposition is an effective action. Please demand that Donald Trump engage in conversation and negotiation. Please preserve negotiation as a path to a better country. And that's all I have.
All right, hands for our speaker. I'll take one or two questions for the speaker. Alex, you can unmute and ask your question to the chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I pretty much agree with everything the speaker stated. In order to build on that, I would ask the speaker what a more successful negotiation looks like so that we can set that example and show people that it can be done without relying on Trump to just refuse to cooperate.
Thank you. That's a great question. It allows me to maybe have some real content. Maybe one example would be Donald Trump wants to take on some of the trade imbalances that he sees China enacting by working with the economists that work for him. He could find ways other than tariffs that those economists are rejecting. There are ways to bypass cheap Chinese steel rather than placing tariffs on them. And economists point out that, look, if the steel is cheap, buy it at a low price. And this is an example of working with this entrenched elite economist rather than working against them.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
I'll take one more question from Bill. Bill, you can go ahead and ask your question to the chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. This is sort of a speculation type of a question. I'll preface it by saying, personally, I believe that a vote for Donald Trump is really a vote for J.D. Vance and a way to get him into office. So my question to you, Ben, or excuse me, my question, Madam Chair, to the Speaker is everything that you've said about Donald Trump, would you also say that's true in spades about J.D. Vance?
I'm not read up on J.D. Vance's background. like I am Donald Trump. I made my judgment based off of Donald Trump's prior actions. And with JD Vance, we don't know yet. I wouldn't say that I have the ability to predict that.
Okay, and with that, the speaker is thanked. Hands for our speaker and questioners. So we are moving now to a speech in the affirmative. And I see that Jonathan has stepped up. Jonathan, you can unmute and you have up to 4 minutes.
All righty. Can you guys hear me and see me good?
Yes, we do.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to start off by, I have the speech written, but I want to touch on, people are talking about elites. Like they're saying that, someone like Elon Musk is an elite, and yes, he is. I mean, the dude's the richest guy on the planet. But when I think of elites, I think of people in power, people that control how our lives go, things that are going to affect our lives. Elon Musk making a new vehicle that sells billions and billions of dollars in sales doesn't affect our lives that much, aside from putting jobs in people's, hands and helping people out. But anyways, so I just want to give I think of billionaires that have paid off politicians or own media companies are the elites. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, today our nation stands at a pivotal crossroad. We face a choice not just between candidates, but between two fundamentally different visions for our country's future. The question before us is clear. Do we continue down the path of the status quo, letting the current elites rule, or do we embrace the change that Donald Trump represents? Recent polls indicated that a significant portion of Americans view Trump's presidency more favorable compared to the current administration. This is not merely a reflection on past leadership, but a clear signal that many are disappointed with the current direction our country is going in. Yet when Kamala Harris was asked if she would change anything about the current presidency, her answer was a resounding no. This is a promise for more of the same policies and strategies, also proof that she will not challenge the entitled elites. Furthermore, consider the media on this regard. It is dominated by companies owned by elites, with most having a clear left-leaning bias. Look at a few examples. CNN, owned by Warner Brothers Discovery, consistently presenting left-leaning perspectives. The New York Times, under the ownership of Stolzenberg family, aligns with progressive views on editorial stances. These are just a few examples of broader patterns, such as MSNBC, Washington Post, NBC, Huffington Post, The Guardian, ABC, where the right news, all that comes to mind is Fox and Newsmax. Even tech giant Facebook, founded and owned by Mark Zuckerberg, has been scrutinized for its perceived suppression of conservative content. Zuckerberg controlled over Facebook, now under a parent company, Meta, has allowed the platform to shape public discourse. In a recent interview, Zuckerberg stated White House administrative officials pressured him to censor content from the right. The overwhelming presence of these left-leaning news outlets, when compared to the few right-leaning news outlets, creates an echo chamber where certain viewpoints are reinforced while alternatives are suppressed. Some may say these news companies have more screen time because they are liked more, but a fallacy comes to mind, ad populum, or in English, appeal to popularity, which is a fallacy. And a fallacy shows a weakness in logic. Just because the majority do something doesn't make it right. Just look to Germany in the early 1900s. This concentration of media power raises serious concerns about the impartiality of information. It's crucial for us to question whether we are receiving a balanced view of the world or if perceptions are being shaped by a handful of elites with their own agendas. As citizens, we must see through the noise. We cannot solely rely on media narratives or social media chatter. We must educate ourselves on real issues, real laws being passed, and understand their impact. Only then can we make informed decisions about our future. Donald Trump represents a break from the norm. His willingness to challenge the status quo is evident in the fierce opposition he is faced by these elites. If the elites are fighting so hard to keep him out, perhaps it's because they fear the change he represents, a change that puts power back in the hands of the people. In conclusion, I urge you all to look beyond the surface, examine the facts, question the narratives, and consider what kind of future we want for our children. A vote for Trump is a vote for change, for a challenge to the status quo, and for the future where voices of people are truly heard. I know some will say he isn't change, but remember, he only had the presidency, but the left had the House and Senate when he was president. It's hard to make change when you are being roadblocked. Thank you for your time.
All right, hands for our speaker, and I'll take 1 or 2 questions for this speaker. Ed Ames, would you like to unmute and ask your question to the chair?
Yeah. This is a question for this speaker. Honestly, I wouldn't mind hearing it answered by all the speakers. And that would be, what are your primary sources?
What are their primary?
What are their primary sources of news?
Thank you. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I actually don't watch almost any news. Almost all my news I get from Google News. So I have all of, the feeds come up and I get feeds from multiple sources. I don't just read one source, I read multiple sources, because when you just read one source, you're in an echo chamber of information. On top of that, I read what laws are being passed. So measure this or measure that or ballot this, or what law is going to be passed. And I read what the effect's going to be, right? Because 2 + 2 = 4. You can say mean things all day online on Twitter, but if 2 + 2 = 4, oh, well, that works. So I base my information and where I get my information from Google News and reading policies that are actually being passed and placed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. And I'll take one more question from Atul. You can unmute and ask your question.
So I heard about the media, but there is equal media from Rush Limbaugh to Glenn Beck and a lot of right-wing media from the New York Post to Washington Times. And so there are a lot of powerful people like Koch brothers and Murdoch, Robert Murdoch, he supports really big media. So I'm not sure about what his, why he thinks that. And the second thing I wanted to ask that if people are saying that something is dangerous, like child is playing with the fire, and everyone's saying that don't play with the fire, is that a wrong thing to say?
Okay, Jonathan, you want to respond?
I only got the first part of that question. Can I get the last part of that question, please? Sorry.
So, like, if someone is saying that Donald Trump is dangerous, and people who are expert, it's like if a child is playing with a bomb, and we are saying, if you will say that don't play with that, it's dangerous, is those people wrong?
Okay, so I guess my answer to that, Madam Chair, would be, how do we know these people are experts? So, I brought up 2 of the biggest right-leaning news sources, but again, like, you can look and see that there are like easily 20 to 30 left-leaning news sources and like 5 or 10 right-leaning. If the majority is one-sided, again, the majority doesn't make you right. Look at Germany, right? The Nazis believed they were right in what they were doing, but I think we can all agree they were wrong. So, just because you're out the majority doesn't make you right. And elites from one side touting information from their side, or elites touting, or not elites, but like professionals or experts from their field on the left or experts from their field on the right, which expert's correct? I think it's naive to look at one side and just say, oh, these experts are correct. I think it's good to read both sides. I'm actually a moderate. And so being able to see both sides' perspectives and both experts from both sides, and then just look at the laws being passed. Don't let this guy say they're the devil and this guy say they're the angel, and you're like, oh, I think he's a devil. Oh, what is passed? Okay, I'm going to ignore both of you, and I'm just going to follow this because this law was passed. And that's what I would suggest. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. And with that, the speaker is thanked. Thanks for our speaker and questioners. Our next speaker who has stepped up is Atul. So you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. When I see like someone said that elite, what elites are, who we call elite, and how Donald Trump can say that he's outsider, or claim it when he was in government for 4 years and he was running for president from last 8 to 10 years. In fact, before that, when he complained about birth certificate of Obama. So he's the biggest elite in any sense of elitism or any definition of elitism. His own cabinet, from the most of his cabinet members were either fired, and they all said that he is unstable, and dangerous. His most of rule were done by the temporary assignment, or I don't know what they call, like they are not confirmed cabinet position in all the ways, including his chief of staff at most of time, or attorney general, or National Security Council. If I have a cancer, I will go to an expert. I will not going to go down someone who is saying that they have cure for it. There are a lot of people still selling like wonder drug and selling you mercury or some type of toxin and saying that this will cure for everything. And we see those kind of things every time. If we don't trust in our scientist, doctor, who sends rocket to the moon, who really cure COVID, or who treats you, or who makes economy work, or who makes sure that this bridge will not fall because of the weight of the traffic, or this train will work, or this plane will fly. How? Why we will not believe them? How I can believe someone who is like 12th pass, or maybe not pass, or whatever, does not know anything about the environment? When we talk about the ozone layer, most of people don't understand, still don't understand, scientific community don't understand what is ozone layer. But we knew that what we are doing with the freon gas is creating problem for ozone. We fix it. We didn't know that lead is creating problem. Lot of scientific community was not out there, but we came to terms that lead is the big problem and we removed it from our gas. So saying that elite, who is elite? Elite in my terms is actually Donald Trump and his cronies who just profit from this disenchantment from the government. I know government is not perfect. There are a lot of things we can fix it, but we have to fix it. There is no silver bullet. There is no one person, and especially not the Donald Trump kind of character and person who can fix anything. He is just a big cheat, a liar, unfit for running a simple business. He has filed for bankruptcy. He did January 6th. How people can forget January 6th? Like, he is still, like, it
Good
never
stuff, Tom.
happened.
Wrap up.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Hands for our speaker. And I will take, oh, sorry about that. I'll take a couple of questions. And I'm looking for people that might not have said anything yet, might not have asked a question. So feel free to raise your hand. David Izquierda, you can unmute and ask your question to the chair.
Yeah, my question to the previous speaker, he mentioned unstable and dangerous being claimed by several fired staffers. I would ask him two questions. Are these comments being made out of spite? Does he have any belief that these comments are being made out of spite? And the other question would be, what unstable and dangerous did we suffer in the 4 years that he was in office?
Okay. Atul, would you like to respond?
The biggest danger was January 6th. And I think that was something which I cannot believe. And I'm an immigrant. And I love America because of their democratic values and the institutions and the rule of law. And I have never, like from George Washington to George Bush, or before that, when Bush and Gore, that was the very close election. No one had not shake the hand and did not leave peacefully. It does not matter. Once results are denounced, you just leave. Does not matter. And doing that is the biggest threat, not only to the America, to every conscious, everyone. I don't understand that how anyone can stand for him after January 6th and what he did on that day.
Thank you. I'll take one more question from Jonathan. Go ahead and unmute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would ask of the previous speaker was speaking about like scientists and experts in the field and kind of basing the majority around that. So I just have a couple quick questions about that. Science is constantly evolving. You know, we constantly, because it's through testing that we find, oh, there's now new evidence or now new information that comes to light. Or, you know, so I'd ask that just because a scientist is saying something is right doesn't mean it actually is. And so I'd ask of the previous speaker to maybe go in on that a little bit. And then the second quick question is that a lot of scientists during COVID were saying that ivermectin is a horse dewormer and it's not suitable for humans, when you can easily look it up that ivermectin has been taken by humans for a very long time. And so was that actually the expert scientists saying that? Or was that actually the entrenched elites forcing the scientists to say that?
Okay, thank you. Would you like to respond?
Sure. So I think I got a little bit distracted, like maybe didn't hear everything, but what the thing is that, and again, the same thing I will ask, you will trust an engineer and professor who has done PhD. Science is evolving for sure, because we always find a new answer for the same question. When Newton said that law of gravity, that was not the end. Then Einstein said that E is equal to mc square, and his relative theory, it was a theory which is still there, but it is not the end. Then we went to quantum, and then we went to boson fields. It's always evolving, that is true. But we are able to fly the plane. And we have those scientists standard which makes you safe and makes you healthy and makes you make sure that you are not like the smoking lead or cancerous product. So saying that science is evolving does not mean that science is wrong. But if you say that because it is evolving, everything what they did is incorrect. And during COVID, Donald Trump said that you should drink bleach. He said that on the TV, that you should drink bleach to clean yourself. If some experts are saying that don't use that, go to a doctor. And if doctor advise you to do that, do that. Do in some type of expert supervision. Don't go to TikTok or Instagram or Facebook and find a solution and try to implement that. That's what I would say.
Thank you. And with that, the speaker is thanked. Hands for our speaker. Our next speaker is speaking in the affirmative, and that is Andrew Forster. Andrew, you can unmute and you have up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If you're old enough, like me, you remember the 1960s and you remember the revolt against the establishment. Now, the establishment in those days was the New Dealers, left over. They'd been in power for about 30 years. And finally, they'd run out of gas. They'd done some great things. They won World War II, contained communism, but then they got into Vietnam. And the draft and the youth revolted against that. And eventually, that ruling class, that set of what today we're calling the elites, was pushed out. That wasn't the first group. This is not uncommon in our history to have a ruling class. I would think about Andrew Jackson, which overcame the ruling class of kind of the Virginia-New York alliance as the first Western from Tennessee president, who changed up things to the expansion west. And that had to happen. Theodore Roosevelt, at the turn of the century, who was a traitor to his class and effectively ended the corruption of the Gilded Era. And then Franklin Roosevelt, the dawn of the New Deal, did some good things, did some bad things. We heard about concentration camps. The last time we had a concentration camp in the US, it was the New Dealers. It was the Japanese internment during World War II. I think we have a ruling class today, just follows in great footsteps, probably started around the 90s, and that's what we're talking about. So let's not kind of confuse ourselves and say they don't exist. We're talking about Elon Musk. We're talking about the ruling class, the deep state. The resolution today is, will Trump stand up to that ruling class? They use the word elites. Let's not get confused about that. I would argue in 3 ways he will. It's what he says he'll do, what he did in his first term. So this isn't exactly unknown. And what do the elites seem to think will happen? The ruling class. Clearly, he says he's going to drain the swamp. That's the ruling class. That's what he says he's going to do. Did he do it in his first term? I think he took some real stands to try and do it, found out it was a lot harder than he thought. He ran into a buzzsaw, but it made the ruling class kind of self-identify, and you got to see exactly who he was talking about. Corrupt politicians that kind of made a mockery of the constitutional impeachment process by trying to impeach him 3 times. The heads of the intelligence agencies who took care of the Hunter Biden laptop thing with total falsehoods. And the FBI and DOJ who ran with a bunch of Hillary Clinton Oppo research and started the Russia thing that ended up getting totally debunked. But all of that chewed up his first term and limited a little bit what he could do. What has the reaction of the elites been? I mean, do they think they're going to be challenged? Clearly they do. We see what he did in the first term. And then you look at the news media, which has been willing to totally waste away its own credibility and reputation with what it does today, which has already been talked about today. Does the ruling class need to go away? You know, the ruling classes aren't a bad thing if they do a good job. I'd have to argue that the one we have today isn't doing a really good job. We have 3 intractable problems that have to end. They're just based on fact. The federal deficit, which is ballooned, and it's going to end, and it's going to end ugly because it can't go on forever. Number 2 gets back into this idea of institutional trust, which we measure through surveys. Clearly is on the decline, has been for 30 years, about the time these guys have been in charge. I've highlighted how people have traded the trust, the DOJ, the press, and everything else for dealing with Trump. You can't run a democracy without institutional trust. I think that's what Trump will do. Let's prove it. People seem to believe it. I think he'll do that. Open to questions. Thank you.
Hands for a speaker, and I will receive a couple of questions for this speaker. Ed Ames, you can unmute, ask your question.
Yeah, it's interesting the speaker brings up the 60s issues. When you look at the writings of the people on the far right, you'll see that that was kind of their formative moment, that these kids were challenging, challenging the status quo. They were challenging racism. They were challenging
What's your
economic
question?
elites. I'll get there in a moment. And the question is this: there's a straight line path from that through to the current policy elites in the Republican Party, policy elites that were appointed and empowered by Trump in his first administration. If your goal is that these things that they were trying to do in the 60s, these were good things and we should keep them, how can someone who is empowering people who are dead set against all of those changes that we made to our society as a result of that, how can someone who appoints and empowers those people possibly stand up to the traditional elites when the whole neocon proposal, their whole agenda is to re-empower traditional elites and to do away with not only the changes we made in the 60s, but the changes we even made at the level of the New Deal? Thank you.
Andrew, would you like to respond?
I got to tell you, I don't understand that question. I object to the premise of that question. We tried to lay out the direct line from the 60s to whatever today. There was a lot of stuff that happened in the middle there. Most of the people that were rejecting the establishment in the 60s were actually leftists, socialists, and, you know, people who rejected that and then wanted to flee to Vietnam and everything. So I don't know. I'm not sure where that's coming from. I don't see it personally. I don't know of a direct line between there and Trump's people 50 years later. I'm not sure that I agree with any of the premise of that question.
In that case, it's just the history of the neoconservative movement. There are plenty of people in it who have written about it,
Okay.
including our Barr, the former.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the question. Sarah, do you have a question for the speaker? You can unmute and ask the chair.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. I believe I heard the speaker refer to the increase in the deficit, and I happen to have been looking it up recently myself. So I'm just asking him, are you saying that the deficit?
Is he saying?
Excuse me. Is the speaker saying that the deficit did not increase during Trump's administration, or that it is increasing more during Biden's? Because I would ask the speaker to look those numbers up.
Okay, Andrew?
Well, again, you can look that up. That's a matter of fact. You know, what the deficit has done for the last 20 years or so. Clearly, it went up under Trump's administration. It's ballooned under Biden's. It ballooned under Obama's. I mean, it's been a ruling class problem for 30 years. The last time it went down was actually late in Clinton's administration, you know, when Newt Gingrich ran Congress. So, but it's got to get dealt. My point only was it's got to get dealt with. It's going to end. It probably is going to end ugly, but it's got to get dealt with. What can't go on forever won't. That was my only point.
All right, and with that,
Madam
the speaker
Chair,
is thanked.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. We're going to move forward. Thank you. We have two more speakers in line right now. If you're wondering how long the line to speak is, it's short. And so there's one more negative speech, one more affirmative speech, and maybe some of you would like to also weigh in on this topic. So to speak against the resolution, I'm going to call on Alex. Alex, you can unmute and you have up to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm an independent with friends on both sides of this issue, so I have a decent understanding of people's underlying concerns. I was asked to come in and speak on the negative side here. Most of people's concerns are issues of trust, and those also come from the issues of risks that people are being asked to take. And neither side is doing this, so I'm going to say Trump is not addressing people's concerns. He's treating things like a zero-sum game. He talks about winning, defeating other countries economically, and dealing with threats that his followers face, the problems that they're dealing with. But he doesn't look for ways to address the fears of the people who fear him. So it seems like he's in a position to replace rule by the unaccountable academic political elite with rule by the unaccountable economic political elite. So he does talk generally about making things better for all Americans, but he doesn't understand his opposition enough to address their concerns about their rights, about their health, about their financial security. Or he might understand, but he doesn't have the leadership to address those concerns without alienating his own voter base. So what I would like to see him do, or anyone, I'd like to see any candidate, but if Trump or Harris does this, good, it doesn't matter to me. I'd like to see them get rid of destructive ideas and zero-sum games by getting creative and replacing them with better ones to address everyone's concerns. And all this opposition comes from the fact that he's not doing it. Somebody's got to change the game to start bringing everyone in to look at problems together, and Trump is not doing that. So I'd like to see people start expressing what matters most to everyone, because that's how we start solving problems together. How much time have I got left?
You have a minute if you want it.
I think that's about it for now. So we'll
It's fine.
perhaps some more time for
That's fine.
questions.
Yeah, yeah. So does anyone have a question for this speaker? You can raise your Zoom hand. Okay. All right. Andrew, you can unmute and ask your question to the chair.
So my question just goes to, you're arguing against the resolution that he would take on the elites?
Yeah, the speaker is
I didn't
arguing against the
hear an
resolution.
argument there. Right.
So what is your question?
Oh,
So what is your argument that he won't
What
take
is
on the
his
elites?
argument? Okay, go ahead,
Yeah.
Alex.
my argument is that the elites, such as they are, the people who Trump supporters do not trust to make decisions in their interests, Trump cannot successfully replace them because he needs to replace them in such a way that he addresses the interests of their supporters. So he's going to lose because he can't generate the goodwill that he needs from the opposition, or he's going to win and generate more resentment from the opposition because they would still have no reason to trust him. So either way, he wouldn't accomplish what he's aiming for.
We'll take one more
That help?
question for the speaker. Jonathan, can I unmute?
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. I would ask of the previous speaker, because I feel like there was some clarity there. I feel like I would like a little more clarity, because there have been plenty kings and queens throughout history that have been overthrown without appealing to their base. So I would like the previous speaker to clarify a little more on why he thinks Trump will not overthrow the elites, or can't overthrow the elites without making everybody happy.
Good question. Now, let's see. Because right now we're playing a zero-sum game. We've got two factions of elites, and they're promising different things to different people. And so if we let's assume that Trump wins and he gets rid of all the people who were working against him in the previous administration. I guess he stands up for a vague promise. What he's promising isn't concrete. It's not to build anything. It's the same thing that the other side is promising. We will protect you from the other people, and what they want doesn't matter because it's going to cause problems, while completely ignoring the problems that his own plans will cause because they're not thought through. It's not constructive. Neither side has constructive plans. And so what he will replace it with is something that's equally broken, just in a different way. That people disagree about it being equally broken, but it can't function. It'll just open the doors for more different elites. Does that make more sense?
Thank you. And with that, our speaker is thanked. Okay. So again, if you would like to speak to this topic, maybe you're not sure how you feel about the resolution, you're not sure if you're for the resolution or against the resolution, but you really would like to contribute to this conversation and you have something to say, that is absolutely in the Braver Angels spirit. Just send a chat to your whip and let them know that you would like to speak. Now speaking in the affirmative is Sherry. Sherry, you can unmute and you have up to 4 minutes.
Thanks a lot. I hate the word elite. A lot of times those are people who self-crown themselves, but in a way, the elites are the people that control you. The biggest elites are the bureaucracy, or those who are unelected, but kind of serve, and it's grown exponentially over the last years. I'm going to give you an example of someone I really don't like, Anthony Blinken. He actually coordinated 51 national security people to lie about a laptop that was Hunter Biden's. Who cares about the porno stuff and the drugs? But he coordinated liars to say it wasn't Hunter's. It was. Now he's our Secretary of State. Now that might help you understand what this elite is. That's one example. The media, someone said, oh, there's lots of different media, but I'm going to tell you a fact. 91% of the media votes or donates to liberals. So if you think you're getting a lot of true news by just listening to your news, you might be wrong. Pew Research, that's a Pew Research number. That's why sometimes people hear and repeat kind of absurd things about what the elite are telling you. I mean, Zuckerberg is an elite. He put $400 million into helping the Democrat win. Yeah, I think that's pretty weird. Some of the biggest lies that have been told by the elite media are the dossier lie, totally a political hit piece by the FBI, but was used by the FISA courts to spy on and, in a sense, destroy the Trump administration. We talked about Hunter's laptop. How about the technocrats who suppress factual information about COVID? Someone mentioned this before. Esteemed medical professionals from Oxford, Stanford, and Harvard were suppressed by your technocrat elite. I know they align with the Democrats and the liberals. That's an elite you should be really angry about. They lied to you about a lot of things. The press also lies about a lot of things like the drinking bleach and dictator on the first day, and even lets other presidential candidates lie about what was said at Charlottesville. I kind of have to address January 6th, okay? So actually the January 6th story is fascinating, right? The damage of about $10 million, never compared with 8 months of BLM riots that cost $2 billion, destroyed courthouses, took over parts of cities for months in some of the states you all live, and resulted in a lot of deaths. Finally, what I consider an elite is anyone who uses their arms of the government, the media, and business to suppress their political foes. That's kind of fascism. That's the classic term of it. And that's what I'm seeing the elites, as I would call them, or they like to call themselves, doing. They're using the government, the arms of the government, FISA courts, we talked about that. They're using the media and their friends in the media, and they're even using businesses to suppress their political foes. And of course, they're using lawfare. So someone mentioned, are game changers and said Trump didn't do that. I don't know. I think if you compare the Harris administration, you'd undoubtedly found many more people, the Biden-Harris administration, who spent a lifetime in government than you ever would have seen with the Trump administration. So again, that's an attempt to bring other people in instead of letting Washington grow and control you and often tell you things that aren't true. I'd be open to looking to some new eyes and new ideas.
All right.
Oh, I got lots of hands. Woo!
Hands for our speaker. And I'm going to take a couple of questions. Let's hear from people that haven't said anything yet. Marielle, you can unmute, ask your question to the chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have a question for the previous speaker, which is a bit twofold. The first thing is suppressing the opposition. If I'm not mistaken, I think ex-President Trump has mentioned that he would adamantly go and suppress any opposition himself as soon as he got in power. So I'd like some more thoughts about, this intention that he made very, very clear. And my second question is, how does replacing the elites with his own family, a daughter, son-in-law, and people who are not formed very often in the field that they're in, is going to be dealt with. So those are the two aspects of my question. Thank you.
Sherry, would you like to respond?
Yeah, sure. I just want to talk about the suppressing his enemies thing. Let me tell you something. During the COVID hysteria, he didn't suppress people. He let a lot of people that he maybe shouldn't have continue to do things that he did not agree with. So I don't agree with this, like he suppresses everything. He specifically said, as a matter of fact, and I don't know, people could talk to me about the COVID thing. He and his government alerted, to the issues in late December and early January. So there's a lot of stuff about COVID. It's a whole different thing. But he specifically said, I'd like to open it up by Easter. Guess who didn't do that? I think some of the elites in certain states didn't do that. They kept it suppressed. I think to create chaos, to create all kinds of things. I think it was very sad, as someone mentioned, it really hurt. I work with kids, really hurt kids. I have kids, really hurt kids. In terms of replacing elites with his family, I mean, I don't know. I was really happy with the Abraham Accords. Before the Harris administration, we had a lot of good things going on in the Mideast. After 2020, obviously, we have a horror situation in the Mideast. I think having a daughter as a consultant, really not a big deal. I don't know. So I think I'd rather, honestly, maybe have people around me I could trust than have people who spent 30 years in government. So I'm open. I don't think he's hired a lot of his family. I think that's kind of like an exaggeration. He had a lot of people. So anyways, that's my perspective on it.
Okay, I'll take one more question, and that's from Marjorie. Marjorie, you can unmute and ask your question to the chair.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Sherry, where you get
Where's she? Ask the question to
where,
me.
oh, I'm sorry, Madam
That's fine.
Chair. I was
Yeah.
wondering where she gets her news and information.
Oh my gosh. So I'm a big studier of the media for decades. Okay. I read, and you can look at my reading list. Every day I look at a little bit at the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Epic Times. I read a lot of other stuff. I read a lot of stuff. I actually think that probably being a conservative, I get more of your news than you get of mine. So I would advise anyone who thinks that he said something at Charlottesville to like maybe read the next paragraph, because the mainstream news didn't print all 3 paragraphs where he said not the bad Nazis, but the press said something totally different. So honestly, I feel like my news, I am very thorough. So, but if you want to talk about that, I would be glad to do a one-on-one, because I'd like to share some news sources that I feel like a lot of my liberal friends don't get to see or don't pay attention to ever. So that's me.
Okay, and with that, speaker is thanked. Hands for our speaker and our questioners. We have a speech in the negative from Bill Marut. Did I get that right?
Yes, thank you. So I'm going to take this literally. It's the proposition is, if elected, Donald Trump will stand up to entrenched elites. And I have 2 objections to that. One is that I don't think Donald Trump has long for this world. He's pretty much suffering from dementia as it is. I think as soon as he gets in, they're going to use the 25th Amendment to put J.D. Vance into the presidency. So it won't be Donald Trump who stands up to elites. It will be J.D. Vance who stands up to elites. But secondly, and even more important, is the word some. I think it's true to say that Donald Trump will stand up to some of the entrenched elites, but not all of the entrenched elites. Question is, who are the elites? And I go back to my favorite comedian, George Carlin, who used to say that the elites are the rich people and the big corporations who have the politicians and the judges in their pockets, maybe the media too. Now, there are elites on the left and there are elites on the right. And I think if Trump/Vance get elected, they will go after or stand up to or target the elites on the left. But what will be left is the elites on the right, whom they will not stand up to or target. I've looked at Project 2025. I look at the people he surrounds himself with. And I think if you get rid of the elites on the left and all you have left is the elites on the right, there's nothing to balance each other out. It's even worse than going from the fireplace into the fire, because you don't have anything to balance each other out. You've just got crackpots like Rudy Giuliani running around on the right-hand side. I'll leave it at that.
All right, and let's see if anyone has a question for this speaker. Barbara, you can unmute, ask your question to the chair.
So, Madam Chair, I would like to ask the speaker, the elites on the right, for example, Dick Cheney, a perfect example, who we all know has abused his government position in the past, are not friends of Donald Trump. He's going to treat them exactly the way he's treated some of the left elites. So what do you make of that? Is there anything to the feeling from the independents that that there's really not a right and a left among elites, just a bunch of crony capitalists helping each other keep in power and keep money? What's your take on that?
So
Yeah,
I go back to
because
my favorite comedian George Carlin, who said that the elites are the rich people and the big corporations who have the politicians and the judges in their pockets. So I don't think Cheney falls into that bucket. There are rich people and big corporations who favor the left, and there are rich people and big corporations who favor the right. Those are all elites. There are elites on both sides. And as I said before, I think Trump would stand up to the elites on the left, but not stand up to the elites on the right. I don't think Dick Cheney is sort of he's not on the radar screen.
All right, I take another question. I saw a bunch of questions, and now I see fewer questions. Jonathan, would you like to ask a question?
There we are. So he was talking about Madam Chair, the previous speaker was speaking about elites from both sides, and we constantly are seeing people from that were actually critics of Trump or from the left that are starting to switch over to his side that are elites. Like Elon Musk originally was more left leaning, and now he's switched to right leaning. So I'd ask of the previous speaker, what they think about stuff like that.
Okay.
About people who switch sides. I'm not sure what the question is. What do I think about people who switch sides, or about the fact that people do switch sides?
That critics of Donald Trump would be willing to switch sides shows a support for someone that they disagree with. And so what the previous speaker would think of like, things like that. Like, why would someone switch sides, completely flip script from their own political party to another party? Like, I forget a third person that backed out of the race. I'm drawing a blank on words. Sorry, guys. I've been at work all day and I got twins and lost sleep last night. But the previous the third guy who dropped out, I forget his name, but he dropped out and endorsed Trump, and he's not even a Republican.
Yeah,
he's
Kennedy.
more left leaning. There
Okay,
you go.
yeah,
So Kennedy.
Thank you. So Bill, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I mean, the question is, why do people switch sides? And you know what? I think it's hard to generalize. It's hard to paint with a broad brush. I mean, people have all different motivations. Some are altruistic and they switch sides because they think that the world will be a better place if they switch sides. Others are just power hungry and they see a way to get more power by switching sides. I really don't want to say anything, but I mean, Elon Musk is very, very wealthy, and I think he sees that his benefit is to be on the side of Trump because it'll make him even more powerful, more wealthy, more famous, whatever. I don't know what every individual's motivations are, but I do know that people are switching sides from the left to the right and from the right to the left.
All right, and with that, our speaker is thanked. We have one more speech, and that is from Bob Fraley. Is that right?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Go ahead.
this is this is not a prepared speech as such. It's more some reaction to various things that have been talked about. So indeed, we do have sort of differing news media, as has been pointed out. I would not say that the conservative media, though, is only a couple of media outlets. For example, when I was in Texas, every single talking station, except for radio, was definitely conservative. So there are many stations. I've witnessed that as I've traveled through, especially rural parts of California and other places. So there are many news outlets other than just the big name ones. And what we're seeing, though, from that is that there is we're creating different sets of reality. So in the case of what I was observing sometimes, there's criticism of the Biden administration as being so horrible and doing such things that are so bad. But most of the time I hear that criticism, it is not about specific things. Now, there are certain specific things that are mentioned, and definitely there are some things that were wrong with the Biden administration. I'm not a 100% Biden fan. But sometimes we're saying, oh, this administration is so bad, but there's nothing given to say why the opinion is true. So we have to watch what these media outlets are actually saying as true, and when they're just giving generalizations that people just buy into, which I'll just call brainwashing. You know, it's repeating over and over again that something is a certain way without really telling you what's going on. One of the things that the Biden administration is criticized for is the inflation. And definitely there was inflation, and definitely there's some room for criticism. But meanwhile, there's also room for congratulations, because when they started out, there was a lot of talk about how the economy was about to go into recession. We managed to avoid the recession. The inflation, one of the months, I think, got up as high as 9%. Another full year, the longest full year, I think, was 7%. And it's now down to 2%. And so only a couple of years, they greatly reduced the inflation without us going through any kind of major financial change. I don't think that gets covered enough. And of course, that's not talking about the problems of the people who are the lowest income people and their ability to be able to support themselves. I realize that's a completely different thing, but the global economy of the U.S. is going pretty well. And let's see, there were some questions about science evolving and people being concerned about evolving. As one of the other respondents pointed out, evolving doesn't mean that it throws everything away. But there is one basic thing in one of my main concerns, which is climate change. The basic principle that's causing the climate change was established 150 years ago. And for 50 some years, 3 generations of scientists attempted to prove it wrong. Nobody has ever proved it wrong. And that is that CO2 accumulating in the atmosphere is going to cause a lot of heat. But we have the Trump administration in the Trump's policies that have become part of the stated platform of the GOP says we're going to produce more and more oil, and we're going to rely on oil, and we're going to use oil and cheap oil to make our economy run much better. But that's exactly what will turn climate change into something which we will never be able to recover from. So
time to wrap up now.
Okay. You said there's a moment okay. So I just wanted to add one more little thing. The French Revolution had an aristocracy in place, and the common people were recruited to use the guillotine on that administration, on that aristocracy. And when it was all finished, there was a new aristocracy, and the common people were just as bad off as they ever were before. So we got to watch what kind of change we're looking for.
Okay, hands for our speaker, our last speaker. I'll take 1 or 2 questions for him.
Sure.
Sherry, would you like to ask a question?
Yeah, Madam Speaker, I'm curious if the speaker doesn't believe that average people are able to understand the complex workings of the economy, of viruses, of a variety of things, and why he thinks that.
Okay, Bob, would you like to respond?
Sure, thank you. I don't think that, actually. I think the common people are sometimes fed information that gives them a biased view, and they don't have resources or time or whatever, seeking other sources of information. But I think in terms of capable of understanding, yes, I believe they are capable of understanding when it's presented to them correctly. And the high level, the academic level or whatever of some of the presentations aren't available to them, so they have to have the proper kind of news reach them that will present it in a way that they can understand what's going on.
And with that, our speaker is thanked.